On today's Community Wednesday, we'll be breaking down the Burst Fire perk. I got a request to cover the Burst Fire Oden, and in the past I've gotten some other Burst Fire requests as well. I think I've covered most of the actual Burst Fire weapons, but none of the conversions. So in one video, I hope to cover pretty much everything there is to know about turning a full auto or semi-auto weapon into burst. And the best way to explain this is by using the FAL, Oden, M4A1, and, to show consistency, the Vanguard, Sten. So the semi-auto FAL, it has 20 rounds in the magazine with this build, and it takes 2.43 seconds to empty it. So that means its rate of fire is 7.83 rounds per second, or 470 rounds per minute. This is a pretty fast rate of fire, and that's what makes the FAL the best semi-auto weapon in the game. This means that in the first damage range, its headshot TTK is above average, its upper torso, lower torso, and limb TTKs are average, and if you just manage to get one headshot in the mix, suddenly you get an extremely competitive TTK of 438 milliseconds. But it shines even more in the second damage range because its shots to kill does not increase. That means that bullet travel time is the only thing that affects your TTK, and that's why it has an extremely great TTK at longer ranges. However, recoil can be a bit of a problem, which is exactly why people want to use the burst mode. So with the burst FAL, with the 20 rounds in the mag, it takes 3.87 seconds to empty, which means its rate of fire is 4.92 rounds per second, or 295 rounds per minute. This is a pretty noticeable 37% slower rate of fire. So how does the burst perk work basically? It keeps the weapon's rate of fire, and then adds a burst delay. So the burst is not any faster than the weapon can already fire. But what does that mean for the TTK? Because of the way that burst timings work, it's only going to be 35% slower. However, in the first damage range, it's going to be beat by everything, even if you get one headshot. And in the second damage range, even with a 2 burst kill, its TTK is going to be below average. And if you get one headshot in the mix, it's only average. And there will be plenty of other weapons with less recoil that can get this TTK or better. But its recoil is a lot better, and you can definitely get a tighter grouping and hit your shots more. Will you be getting your headshot in the mix? Probably not, because the third shot's always harder to hit. But there is a way to get a better TTK and less recoil at the same time. If we just decrease our rate of fire by 20% when it's in semi-auto, things change a lot. We go from this to this. With 20 rounds in the mag, it takes 3 seconds to empty, and its rate of fire is 6.27 rounds per second, or 376 rounds per minute. This is around 100 rounds per minute slower than the normal FAL. And for most people, this is going to be extremely easy to hit. So if we look at our TTKs, we do see that it's a 25% slower TTK. But 25% is still better than 35% that the burst was getting. In the first damage range, we see that it's going to be beat by basically everything. But if we get one headshot in the mix, it is going to get an average TTK. But in the second damage range, we can see that it gets an average TTK across the board. Unless you get one headshot in the mix, then it's going to be above average. And if we take a look at the recoil, it's actually pretty great. It looks very similar to the burst recoil. However, this time you have direct control of when each shot fires, and you know the recoil pattern that it's going to have. So what does this mean? Under 30 meters, try to hit the maximum fire rate, since you're probably close enough to ignore most of its recoil problems. But after the 30 meter damage range, you can slow down your fire rate a bit and still get a great TTK. So if you're not too comfortable trying to always hit that fast fire rate, you can safely slow down at longer ranges and be perfectly okay. So because of its slower rate of fire and its innate semi-auto nature, the FAL is a really great example to show how TTK is affected by changing your rate of fire, or changing it to burst. So now, let's try it with a slower rate of fire weapon, but that is fully automatic, the Oden. The Oden goes through 20 rounds in 2.76 seconds, which means its rate of fire is 6.88 rounds per second, or 413 rounds per minute. And I'm not really going to go over its TTKs because I've already talked about them before in its stat guide. Its second damage range TTK has potential, but it's probably not going to happen since its recoil is not really great. Now in burst, it goes through 20 rounds in 5.2 seconds, which means its rate of fire is 3.65 rounds per second, or 219 rounds per minute. This is really slow. It is 47% slower than it is in full auto. And this is because it only has 2 rounds in a burst, not 3. So it fires the same 2 rounds at the same speed, but then has an extremely long delay before the next 2. So what does this do to the TTK? It makes it unusable, completely unusable. You will lose every gunfight in every single location to pretty much every single weapon. Its TTK is 93% slower, which is absolutely insane. And the worst part, if the TTK wasn't bad enough already, it pretty much takes your entire recoil pattern and it just cuts it up into pieces. And that's what makes the Oden in burst mode even worse. And now for the M4, which has the highest rate of fire of all the weapons we'll be looking at. What do you think is going to happen? The M4 has 30 rounds in the magazine, and it takes 2.15 seconds to empty, which means its rate of fire is 13.5 rounds per second or 810 rounds per minute. If you get one headshot in the mix, in the first damage range, you're going to get an above average TTK, meaning it's actually pretty good up close and at range. Because at range, it gets a pretty average TTK, which is a good thing for longer ranges. But now when we switch it to burst, it takes 4.49 seconds to empty, which means it has a rate of fire of 6.46 rounds per second or 387.5 rounds per minute. That is a huge 52% decrease. And when we look at the TTK, that is 116% slower. And does the recoil get any better or worse? Not really, it's just about the same as when used normally. It's just, again, the recoil segmented into 3s. Pretty much, the faster your rate of fire, the more it's going to get hurt by the burst delay. And I did say I was going to cover it. So Vanguard weapons, are they exactly the same as Modern Warfare? It's not a perk, but an attachment. And sadly, yes. With the burst barrel attached, it is now 29% slower. So once again, the burst fire attachment will put you at a disadvantage. Weapons designed to be used in burst usually don't have a drop off, and they usually have it set that it's 2 bursts plus 1 extra shot, so that whenever you get 1 headshot in the mix, it makes it a 2 burst kill. And surprisingly, the recoil is pretty good. Is it going to be as great as a low damage long range assault rifle? No. But it's good enough to be used around 100 meters, and this will go for pretty much all burst weapons. And we can see this with the M16. The TTK is pretty high if you don't get any headshots, but as soon as you can guarantee that 2 burst kill, suddenly in the first damage range, it is average and actually pretty decent, and in the second damage range, it's above average. So don't use burst mode on a full auto and semi-auto weapon. On a semi-auto weapon, just slow down your rate of fire by a tiny bit. And on full auto weapons, if you have to, just let go of the trigger and reset the recoil pattern. Because you're only going to be adding a few milliseconds to your TTK instead of doubling it. So hopefully this explanation is detailed enough to tell you guys why you shouldn't be using burst fire on these types of weapons. Do you agree with these reasons, or do you just really enjoy doubling your TTK? And as always, if there's any weapon build or part of the game you want me to break down, let me know and you may see it on the next Community Wednesday. Thanks for watching.